Dr. Brand would just marvel at the wisdom of the designer in putting together the body. The first person I had ever met who marveled at the design of the pain system in the human body. But he would say, thank God for pain. If there's only one gift that I could give my leprosy patients, it would be the gift of pain.
The gift of pain, the discoveries and insights of a surgeon to lepers, Dr. Paul Brand, on this day of discovery.
I think it's fair to say that I went to India with the feeling that there was a lot of suffering there. And I was going to India in the name of Jesus Christ to help relieve human suffering, where there were no doctors and very little pain medication. But when I went there, one of the early things that I experienced was to see beggars along the side of the street and outside the temples, people with no fingers on their hands, blind, with feet that were either grossly ulcerated and covered with flies or amputated. And I asked people, what are those people? Oh, they said they've got leprosy. Leprosy. I'd never thought about leprosy.
God was saying to him, this is why I brought you to India. And he began to get a tingling feeling that the Lord was really speaking to him, not out loud, but in his mind, so strongly. This is what you've got to do. You've got to find the answers.
Paul and Margaret Brand finished at the top of their class in medical school in England during World War II.
Her name began with a B. She was a Berry. And my name began with a B. And so we shared a bench, chemistry bench in the chemistry laboratory. And that's how we met.
In 1946, they began an extraordinary journey to India as medical doctors working with the outcasts of society, lepers.
Dr. Brand initially became involved in leprosy for two reasons. One was the humanitarian need, and secondly, the medical challenge of understanding the disease and doing something for the patients.
Along with his wife Margaret, who became an expert in ocular leprosy, Dr. Brand spearheaded several medical breakthroughs in the treatment of leprosy. Using his skills as an orthopedic surgeon and carpenter, he reconstructed limbs destroyed by the debilitating effects of leprosy. Leprosy destroys the surface nerves in the hands, feet, and face, numbing them in the process. Not sensing any pain, leprosy sufferers lack the recoil instinct that pain causes in the rest of us. As a result, they destroy their own limbs through unintentional but constant abuse.
So here is this brilliant scientist who stands right at the top with medical wisdom and scientific knowledge, who spent his life literally refashioning the hands and the feet of these people, these nobodies, these worthless people in terms of society, but to him they weren't worthless. He truly believed that in the least of these, the image of God was there, and he was trying to help bring that to the surface, help bring it back, help make them a person who could once again work. And he said, how classic that when God came to earth, he came not as Superman, not as someone who impressed you with his muscles and his power and his beauty, but who became a suffering servant, one who gave his life, one who was so disfigured he became a person from whom men and women turned their faces. And that's been a lasting contribution. They're some of the saddest, most miserable people I've ever met, because they have no warning system and they are literally destroying themselves. They can't hear that language of pain anymore.
Philip Yancey and Paul Brand wrote the book The Gift of Pain, based on Dr. Brand's life and his work with leprosy patients. He believed pain should be embraced for what it is, the body's most significant trauma alert system.
And Dr. Brand revolutionized that way of thinking for me. He helped me to see that pain is not a great mistake, that pain is rather a language that our body uses to get our attention about something that we'd rather not pay attention to.
Dr. Brand encourages us to listen to our pain. It may be trying to tell us that we're afflicting our ears with loudness, our stomachs with unhealthy food, and our lungs with pollutants. Many often wonder why we have to suffer pain. Couldn't God have created us without it?
But I ask that person whether he would like to be free from the possibility of pain in exchange for the loss of his free will. If every time he was going to move into a dangerous situation, he found that he was paralyzed and he could only move his legs in another direction, that God controlled everything he did and everything he thought, that would make possible a pain-free life. I have never found anybody who feels that in exchange for the gift of free will, he would accept the gift of painlessness. One of the things that worries me about pain is that Christians, I think, often suffer more from pain, from a given amount of pain, than an unbeliever does. Because an unbeliever knows that it's just something that's happened to him, and he accepts that this is too bad, and he must try and get cured or get rid of it. But a Christian often, traditionally, thinks, why has this happened to me? Why did God choose me to have this terrible terminal illness, this cancer, with so much pain? What have I done? The word pain comes from a root concept of punishment. And that's how Christians often think of this, that God has sent this to me either to test my faith or to because I haven't been behaving the way I should. And I believe that this isn't the right way to look at it. So often Christian teachers and preachers concentrate on the wickedness and on the wrong and on the failings and say that you must do better. But the central truth of God is love.
When bad things happen, followers of Jesus often ask the question, why me? For help, they typically quote from Romans 8:28. All things work together for good to them that love God, believing that God alone will work out the problem, even though it appears hopeless.
And that conveys the idea things work for good because I love God. In other words, if I'm going on a picnic, it won't rain. But if I want my garden to grow, it will rain. Because I believe God, and I trust Him and pray, and therefore God sends. But Jesus said that God, in His love for the world, He makes His rain to rain on the just and on the unjust. And He makes His sun to shine on the righteous and on the unrighteous. But the real meaning of that text is brought out in some of the modern translations. And it suggests, it writes it this way: in everything that happens, God is working for good with those who love Him. In all things, God works with me for good. You know, we use a word in science called synergism. Synergism refers to two forces or two activities that work together and together produce a result which is better than the sum of what they could do separately. If I trip on something and fall and break my nose and have a lot of pain, I don't say, why me, Lord? I say, look what's happened, God. Look what's happened. What are we going to do about it?
He believed that you had to take the pain and take it into a positive and realize that it was something that contributed to your life instead of took away from your life.
Dr. Brand encouraged patients to listen to their pain and manage it instead of simply trying to eliminate it. From traditional Indian culture, Dr. Brand learned new ways to manage pain. Instead of just prescribing pain medication, which few had access to, they found different ways to cope. One of these was the practice of family members sleeping under or next to the patient's bed.
Some post-operative patient would be sleeping in bed and he'd wake and kind of groan. Instantly, his wife or sister or somebody would get up from under the bed and put their hand on the hurting spot and perhaps stroke it a little bit and speak a few words, and the patient would go back to sleep. And that was the pain medication.
Dr. Brand observed that the fear of pain often gives rise to an increase in pain.
When people are afraid, when the pain evokes fear, then the pain gets worse. If the fear can be allayed, replaced in the Christian by faith and by trust and by understanding, the pain diminishes.
The same thing happens when we are angry about our pain or the person who caused it. Many experts believe that what happens in a person's mind is the most important factor in managing pain. Unfortunately, our mental attitude is the most difficult to treat. Dr. Brand came to believe that doctors, nurses, and therapists have a unique privilege in seeing patients in their most vulnerable state. Pain strips away all pretenses and reveals the secrets of the heart.
They've perhaps thought seriously about their own eternal destiny for the first time. Seriously, even though they may have thought of themselves as Christians before. The real ultimate questions of where am I headed comes to them afresh and much stronger because they are afraid of death, which has been initiated by the pain that they suffer.
After almost 20 years of helping transform the lives of thousands of lepers, the Brands left India to teach and work at the only leprosarium in America, the U.S. Public Health Hospital at Carville, Louisiana. Later, it became the National Hansen's Disease Program in Baton Rouge. Dr. Ronnie Matthews, hand surgeon, was greatly influenced by Dr. Brand.
Again, Dr. Brand showed the feasibility of taking a hand like that, and even though the digits are shortened, to provide tendon transfers, to be able to flex the fingers down, and to be able to devise surgical procedures to straighten out the tip of the thumb and help bring the thumb around. So the patients that have shortened digits and a hand that looks similar to this, Dr. Brand's tendon operations allowed them to be able to make a grasp with their fingers and bring their thumb, instead of to form like this, to be able to pinch in the front of their fingers as well as to the side of the finger to allow them to pick up objects. This was remarkable.
Eddie is a patient at the Baton Rouge Clinic. His deformities from leprosy required extensive restorative surgery. Dr. Matthews used techniques pioneered by his mentor, Dr. Brand, to help Eddie live a normal life.
We did some reconstruction on Eddie's hand years ago, and I wanted to just check your hands, Eddie, and it seems like they're doing pretty well for you. Before he had the operation, his fingers were clawed. They would curl bad, similar to what I would show here. And by taking a muscle that was not paralyzed and a very expendable muscle and extending it to his fingers, it gave him the ability to make a grasp. And Eddie has the ability to grasp around my hand, or he could reach around a form, or hold a Coke can, or things of that sort. You got to watch your hands now that you don't injure them. Don't be cooking and hurt them at it. All right? We'll see you later.
Paul and Margaret brought their knowledge and experience from India to their counterparts in the U.S. This included reconstructive surgeries, various hand therapies, and making custom-built shoes and prosthetics. Paul taught for many years at the Louisiana State University's Medical College, while Margaret trained residents at Tulane Medical School. Leprosy deformities have existed for thousands of years, and orthopedic surgeons have been around for decades. But Paul Brand was the first person to employ these techniques on patients who were deformed from leprosy.
And one of the great chapters of missionary medicine is that it was only the missionaries who would go and actually touch those with leprosy. So that most of the advances in the treatment of the disease didn't come from great scientists, they came from missionary doctors. They were the only ones who were there, who were actually in contact with the patients.
When Dr. Brand met a patient for the first time, he would hold the deformed hand or foot to calm the person down. Then he would always say something positive about it before concentrating on what was wrong.
We would watch him and try to determine how, in a group of people, he could have them mesmerized. Or just with one patient, he could have a patient come in who was hiding their hands, and before they would leave, they would be proud of their hands and walk out with them.
Dr. Brand, he never hired a wardrobe consultant, I'll put it that way. He usually had little flecks of blood from some experiment he was doing, and was barefoot and wore these loose-fitting, out-of-fashion clothes. And I don't think Margaret had much of a makeup kit, you know, because they knew that God doesn't look on the exterior appearance, God looks on the heart. And they had lived their lives among people who would never have an attractive exterior appearance, but they could have a beauty that shone through whatever that face was. That's a lasting lesson I'll learn from both of them.
Dr. Brand often would reassure me that I was doing the right thing in life, and that he had given me appropriate training to do the right operations. Hopefully instilled in me the appropriate values to be a better person, to be a better Christian. And he would turn me loose.
Paul Brand had a very unique way of looking at the world. He used what he saw in a telescope to confirm what he saw in his microscope. That planets revolving around the nucleus of a star and electrons revolving around the nucleus of an atom were all designed by our Creator for different but critical life-affirming purposes. He understood that the handprint of God, the designer, is visible in the universe all the way down to a single cell.
The physical laws of the universe are being worked out, and anybody who really studies geology and astronomy and physics can only wonder at the harmony and at the way these laws work together. I think it's up to us to study them, and then to, you know, a person who goes to the Sahara Desert and plants rice is just not being very sensible. Even if he prays to God for rain, if he's planted rice in the middle of the Sahara Desert, he hasn't studied God's natural law. And I think we can become too spiritual in a sense that we attribute to God the individual outworking of the physical laws by which he holds the universe together.
If you came down to one attribute that he built upon, it was this curiosity which he kept at a sort of naive level. And what I mean by that is that a lot of people want to learn about something, and they go and read what has already been said about that. But Paul would approach it as if he was going to look at this on his own from scratch and not just assume that what other people said about it was correct.
With so many patients, Dr. Brand realized he couldn't personally treat everyone. So he began to teach physical therapists, orthotic engineers, and other physicians what he had learned.
Many of our students in India remember his lectures even today, 30, 40, 50 years back. And they say, we never had to take notes. You couldn't forget what he said in class. He was just outstanding.
Dr. Brand could weave together lessons from the perspective of a doctor, scientist, and preacher.
I wouldn't say he's a jack of all trades, I would say he's master of all trades. I mean, whatever he puts his hand to, he gives up his best and comes out with flying colors always.
As I say, I think Paul had a great sense of adventure. And he was always looking beyond the immediate. He also had a great sense of the worth of other individuals. And he has absolutely no pride. I mean, no kind of feeling that this is out of my realm and I don't want to get involved in this.
You know, when my dad was invited to go meet the Queen, he didn't even tell my mom. She found a note in his pocket when she was doing the wash. And, were you invited to see the Queen? Oh, yes, that's right, I was invited to go see the Queen.
Philip Yancey followed Dr. Brand to India and Louisiana to discover firsthand his impact on the world. In the process, they became good friends. They collaborated on books such as Fearfully and Wonderfully Made and In the Likeness of God.
Here was a person that I examined for 10 years, as closely as I knew how to examine a person, who stood up to scrutiny. And when I looked at Dr. Brand, I realized, aha, so that's what God had in mind when he created a human being.
Right before his death, I had the opportunity to go to Seattle and see him in his hospital room. And Dr. Brand would only on being paralyzed on one side, had one hand. When you put it in his hand, he would grasp your hand. And he would hold it quite tightly. And he would sense that you were there and grip you and let up and grip you. I had an opportunity that evening to sit at his bedside with him gripping my hand. And around 7 or 8 p.m. we got ready to go to our hotel room, and he turned my hand, go. Let me go for the last time, and sent me about my way to be a better surgeon, to be a better person.
But I think that perhaps the thing that he's most proud of is that he has helped, with the Lord's help, to lift people out of the gutter, put their feet on a firm place again. And I can't think of any better legacy.